This is Diana Sullivan in Austin, Texas. I have made one of my Squared Away Entrelac Afghans using Karen latte cakes on the bulky machine and just letting the colors fall where they fall. And I'm really happy with it, but I wanted a different edging this time. So I came up with these points, and I'm just now putting the last side on the Afghan of this edging. So I'm going to show you how to do this. To get started, put the carriage on the left. Mark your needle bed in groups of needles. I marked mine in groups of 12 needles because my entrelac squares are 12 needles, and I wanted my points to be 12 needles and to match up to the squares. For instance, you can see that here, that each of these squares has its own point. And I'm going to work with the wrong side, the pearl side of the Afghan facing me, and I'm starting at the far left edge of the bed. And I have a red mark after every 12 needles. I'm going to start by taking this loop of yarn right here from where I ended off, and I'm going to put it on the first group in a group of 12 needles and just secure that. And I'll thread the machine with that. I zoomed in closely so that you could see how I do this. Now the entrelac alternates between blocks that are knitted this way and blocks that are knitted vertically. And on each of these blocks, whichever way they're knitted, I pick up 12. So working down the side of this block, I'm going to pick up 12 loops. And I'm going to put my first loop on this needle with that piece of yarn from the previous side. I've used a continuous piece of yarn to edge this, which eliminates most of the ends that I would have to hide. Now, as you look at the side of a piece of knitting, there is a knot, a little small knot, and then there is a loop. The loops are bigger, they're easy to get your tool into. Now, my yarn for the blanket was quite fuzzy, and I think that makes it difficult on video, not so much in person, but on video, to see what to pick up. Well, when you're picking up entrelac along the side of the knitting, you'll have the pearl side facing you, and along the side, if you unroll it, you will see that there is a big loop that your tool goes in really easily, followed by a little small knot. You can still get a tool in it, but it's the little one. And then the very next strand along the edge will be the big loop, and then there'll be a little knot and a big loop. And what we're going to do as we pick up the sides of these squares is going to be almost all picking up the big loops, which is easy because the tool goes right in those big loops so easily. However, on most of these squares, you're going to need to pick up one knot just to have enough pickups across to get your 12 for your squares. Now let's have another look at that. I'm going to pull the knitting down. If I pull the knitting down, then you can kind of see right through it. And do you see this line right here? That is the side edge of the next column of knitting. So that's what you pick up. It's really pretty easy to do, and now I'll be doing it on the blanket. And you want to get the loops, unless you don't have enough loops for the 12 you need, and in that case, pick up one of the knots. Now you normally need to pick up one or two of the knots to make it work out. I didn't need to pick up that knot. So, here we go, getting the loops only. The next square, which was knitted this way, up and down, ends with some waste yarn, and I need to pick up 12 stitches. There happen to be 12 stitches that were live stitches, and I secured them by doing a few rows of this light blue waste knitting. So I pick those up and put them on the next 12 needles. Because I marked my needle bed and pre-counted these needles, I know that if I get 12, I didn't miss a stitch because there were 12 stitches, there are 12 needles. Leave the waste yarn on. Don't take the waste yarn off until you have to. The next block will be along the side of the knitting, and I'll pick up the loops, mostly loops. I might get a knot so that I have enough to fill in my 12 needles. Now I'm going to save you a little time, pick the rest of this up, and then come back on camera. Now I've picked up as many groups of 12 as would fit on the needle bed. I'm going to have to do a few more because I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 more squares that wouldn't fit, but that's okay. Now I have a couple more steps to do before I can pick up the stitches. One is to bring all the needles out to hold position. Another is to use my secret weapon, some brightly colored ravel cord, to make the hem I'm going to do later on, because these little triangles are doubled, to make it much easier to pick up. This is an amazing trick to mark that first picked up row. What I'm going to do is weave this brightly colored thread in and out, over and under the needles, all the way across. This doesn't take very long to do. It's really easy to get it out later, and it will make it so easy to pick up the hem. Sometimes when you're machine knitting, they'll tell you to pick up some stitches and you really don't know exactly what threads to pick up. Well, this marks it perfectly and makes it really very easy to pick up. So I'll get this woven over and under the needles all the way across, and I'll push it all the way back toward the gate pegs, and then I'll be right back. I call this upcoming row my pickup row. I've woven this brightly colored ravel cord in here all the way across. I'm loosening the tension to tension 10 on the carriage, and I'm changing the setting so that it will knit all these stitches. I have to do this row looser because I'm going to pick up those stitches later for the hem, and they need to be big enough stitches to go through this and then be picked up and used again. And I knit one row from left to right. I want it loose, so I stop occasionally and pull a little yarn down from above. Now, I have waste yarn on a lot of this, and I leave the waste yarn on the whole time. If anything were to go wrong, then nothing would unravel because the waste yarn is holding it securely. Now I'm going to do the individual points, and I'm going to start at the right-hand side of the bed. I'll focus in that area. I changed the setting on the carriage so that it does not knit held needles. On this machine, That was just sliding over from N to H. And I'm going back to the same tension as my blanket. No more loose stuff for a while. Then you'll recall I had these needles marked in groups of 12, and I'm only working on the rightmost group of 12 first. So I'm putting all the others in hold. Now when you're in a situation like this and you've got all these needles in hold, you want to not touch them. You don't want to knock them in part way, because if you push them in part way, then they'll knit. And these little hooks can catch your skin and hurt you. So you want to sit up a little bit high and keep your arm and elbow up above the needles here. Now I'm going to do the short rowing to make one of these lovely folded double points. I put the first needle next to the carriage all the way into hold and knit across, and then the next needle on the other side, this is where the carriage is now, so it's the needle on the carriage side into hold and knit that, and I keep bringing a needle forward on the carriage side each time. And because I'm short rowing, it always works better with weight. So I am hanging a claw weight on there, and I'll move that claw weight occasionally. I keep doing these short row decreases until I get down to only 2 needles in work. And then I want to do increases. Now the increases are done very quickly by just pushing the needle part way back, and it's the needle opposite the carriage this time. And then I knit. I'm going to move my weight up, push the needle opposite the carriage again and knit back. And I'm going to do that until I have 11 of the 12 needles back in work. Now I have 3, 6, 9, 10, 11 of the 12 needles, and I'm going to put that last one in work, and then I need to reposition. To reposition, I'm going to knit across this group and then across the next group of 12 needles. So I'll take my needle pusher. I have marked these groups so it's easy for me to see what to push back. You could sit and count, but I like having marks. And I'm going to knit to the left to reposition. Now, if you end up on the right after you have your 12 needles in work, then you're going to do it this way. If you end up on the right and you only have 11 in work, then you'll push that one back plus the rest. You want to end up repositioning from right to left, and it's just going to vary. The first time you'll end up on the right, the other times you're going to end up on the left. It's a matter of the counting of the needles. And if you made a miscount, it probably wouldn't matter. You can adjust and move on over the way you need to. Now, I finished this one, so I'm not working on it again for a while, not until I pick up the hem. Now I'm going to do this group. These always are better to do with some weight, so I'm moving my weight there. And once again, I'm doing my decreases. One decrease on the carriage side each row until I get down to 2 in work. And occasionally I move the weight up. Now I'm down to 2, and I'm going to increase back out the same way I did it on the other group. Now I have 11 in work. This one right here is the 12th, but I know I need to reposition. So I'm going to put these other needles into work. That's upper working position halfway back. Then I can knit across them, and I'm repositioned to work on them. Not doing these anymore, so these go and hold. And moving my weight to the middle of this group. And I'll do the decreases here, just like I did the others. Now what I'm going to do now is work this way all the way across the needle bed off camera. Then I'll come back and show you the next steps. So I'll be back in a few minutes. Right now I'm over at the far left end of the bed doing that last group. And that's it. I have 10 of these little points. You can see them if you want, turn them this way and look at them, but I poke them in because I'm going to pick up a hem right here all the way across. Now, in order to make this easy to pick up a hem, I'm going to use a transfer tool. This is a big transfer tool that has 6 stitches, and I'm just pushing the needles in and then popping the stitches inside the latches. This will make it so much easier to pick up the hem, and with this particular tool you can see this goes really fast. And to make this secure, I am just pushing these needles back. So I'll do this all the way across and be right back after that little job is done. Now I want to show you how this hem is picked up, and I think if you look closely you can see the bits of green string. Here's the end of that green string, and it runs under a loop, and that's the thing to pick up and put on a needle straight up above it. Now I skipped the first one because hems are always 1 loop short, and I put the stitch on the next one, and then after that I use every needle, and I am fiddling with this with my fingers, trying to make it so you can see it. Here is a piece of green string. It's here, and then it goes in this loop, and it comes out here. This is my next loop to pick up. It's really obvious what to pick up. It's the piece of yarn that has the green string in it. And in fact, this is easy enough to pick up that I can just spot my loops and do 2 at a time with a double transfer tool. And I don't worry about the green string at all. If it gets in the hooks, it doesn't do any harm. Let's see, I already got that one. And if it's below the hooks, that's fine too. The green string does not cause any particular problems. So now I just work my way across, looking for the stitches that have green string in them and picking those up. Now over on this group I can see a little bit of the waste yarn peeking in, and I just ignore that. I don't want to hook it on a needle or anything. I just want to leave it alone. It'll have to be unraveled later, but in the meantime it's acting as a stitch holder. Oh look, there's a piece I hooked. I don't really want that waste yarn hooked. Then I have to cut it to get it off if I split it like that. Okay, and I've already picked up the hem for 2 sections of 12, and I'm going to keep picking up hem on across. It'll go pretty fast. If you want, you can put your fingers down in this little pocket to help you catch the stitches that have the green string. Or you can put your hand under the blanket, whatever works for you. I will get those hung on, and I'll be back when that job is done. I have picked up that hem all the way across. I am putting these needles into hold position, And I'm going to close this hem by knitting a loose row. So once again, I will roll my tension dial up to 10, and I'll set the machine to knit every one of these needles, even the ones in hold. And I'll just go across slowly because I'll do a few stitches, then I'll pull some yarn down from above to loosen things up, do a few more, pull down more yarn. I just don't want these stitches too tight, so I take the extra time to do that. And now I'm ready to latch this off. This will be finished at that point, except for that last little section on the right that I still need to do. So I'm putting all of the needles in hold position, and as I push them out, I'm holding the knitting back against the gate pegs. And then I'm going to take a latch tool and do a loop through a loop bind off all the way across, working from left to right. Let me zoom in on that process. Here's how that works. I stick the tool in the knitted loop, the one that's on the needle, and I pull it off the needle with the tool. Then I push the tool into the loop far enough so it's below the latch, and I catch the next loop inside the latch, and then I pull a loop through a loop. This is the same bind off that I use so very often. Because of the weight of the blanket holding it down, and because the ends of the needles have this curve and they're bigger than the rest of the needle, it doesn't just fall off and give us trouble, which is a good thing. And I just latch all the way across. I do not cut the yarn. When I get over to the far right side of the work, I will do something a little bit different. So to save you having to watch this boring bit, I'm going to go ahead, get this latching done, and you can pick me back up at the far right end of the work where I have to end this off and be ready to move on to my very last section of edging. Here I am doing the last few on the right. When I get to the end of the row, it's a little easier to accidentally pull them off the needles, and that would not be good. So I'm being very careful to control the stitches so that I don't pull them off the needles early and then have something unraveling. I'm not cutting the yarn because I'm going to keep working and get those last few blocks edged. And I'm going to use the same piece of yarn. So here I am pulling this last loop through, and then I just catch this yarn, pull a big loop through, and I'm putting a clothespin on that big loop. That's just going to hold that for me while I get set up to do the last few of the blocks. I am finishing up that last section, which had 4 blocks to it. So I'm going to do the loose row and then the latch off right here. This one will be different though, because having gotten all the way around the afghan, I'm cutting the yarn. When I get latched off, I'll pull that end through the last loop. Now I should also mention how easy it is to get the green string out. So I'm taking the clothespin off the right hand end of that green string, and I take the left hand end because that was connected to the spool. I didn't even bother to cut it, and it just slides right out. So that's one of the things you'll need to do. You'll also have to unravel the waste yarn, and you'll have just a very few ends to hide. The beginning and the end of the edging, for instance, will have an end of the yarn, and you may have a few places in your work where you joined new yarn, and those will need to be hidden. I do not block entrelac. I let it do its wavy, swirly stuff that it does naturally. And it's a three-dimensional sort of stitch. I don't really want to flatten it. I like the look of it. I am going to come back after I have removed the waste yarn and I have hidden the ends and show you how this all looks. I spread the finished blanket out on the floor of my knitting room, and I'm hoping you can see how it looks. I am really very, very happy with the pointed edging. I'm going to zoom in on a section of that edging so you can see it better. Here I've flipped over a corner of the blanket so you can see how beautifully it finishes from the wrong side. This looks great on both sides. It's a good sturdy edging and it really flatters this geometric design. Here's a section of that edging, and you can also see how it goes on around the corner. Anyway, I'm very happy to have this done. There are a lot of hours in a big entrelac blanket, but I do think this one is absolutely a beauty, and I enjoyed working on it very, very much. I hope you'll try this edging. You can try it with a small sample and see if you don't really love it too. Here's another close-up of the blanket so that you can see the corners, see the edging, which is of course doubled. And then here's what the wrong side of the blanket is like. If you enjoyed this content, help me out by clicking on the subscribe link and also by clicking on the notify bell. That way you will always know about my new videos when they come out. Now if you would like to make the Squared Away Entrelac Afghan, this pattern is a digital pattern, so it's inexpensive, and it is available at www.dianaknits.com. Also, have a look at my Facebook group, Knitting with Diana Sullivan. We have a wonderful group of people there. I have a blog as well, diananatters.blogspot.com. At my blog, you'll find all kinds of inspiration and innovative ideas so that you can get more knitting done and have more fun with your knitting machine.